Range Rover 1970 to 1996. The Range Rover Classic is a 4x4, mid-size sport utility vehicle series produced from 1969 to 1996, initially by the Rover, later Land Rover, division of British Leyland, and latterly by the Rover Group. The first generation of vehicles produced under the Range Rover name, it was built as a two-door model for its first 11 years, until a four-door also became available in 1981. The Range Rover then successfully moved up market during the 1980s, and remarkably debuted in the US as a 17-year-old model at the 1987 Los Angeles Auto Show. Availability of the two-door version was restricted from 1984, but it remained in production for some markets until 1994, when the second generation was launched. From that moment, Land Rover rebranded the original model under the term Range Rover Classic, to distinguish it from its new P38A successor, when the two were briefly built alongside, and applied the name retrospectively to all first-generation Range Rovers. Although formally superseded by the second-generation Range Rover, starting in 1994, both the successor and a more affordable first and second series of the Land Rover Discovery were heavily based on the original Range Rover's chassis, drivetrain and body structure, which in essence lived on until the third-generation Discovery arrived, and its mechanical bloodline ended with the replacement of the Mk2 Discovery after 2004. In early 2020, the 26-year production run of the original Range Rover was counted as the 27th most long-lived single-generation car in history by Autocar magazine. This section does not cite any sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. December 2009, learn how and when to remove this template message. Rover's Land Rover series I launched in 1948 had been designed to be cheap, simple to manufacture, and suitable for hard work in rural terrain, with minimal concessions toward comfort. Rover shortly realized that a market existed for an off-road capable vehicle with more amenities. In 1949 the Land Rover estate car was released, with a coach-built wood-framed body by Tickford. However, the high price of adding such car-like features as 7 seats, floor carpets, a heater, a one-piece windscreen resulted in fewer than 700 being sold before being dropped in 1951. In 1954 Land Rover launched the second iteration estate car, this time aimed at the commercial user who needed an off-road vehicle for carrying passengers without car-like comforts. Based on the commercial panel van variant Land Rover, it had seats fitted to the load space and windows cut into the sides. While available with features such as an interior light, heater, door and floor trims and upgraded seats, the estate car retained the base vehicle's tough and capable suspension, as well as its mediocre road performance. By the late 1950s Rover had become convinced a market for a more comfortable 4x4 existed in areas such as Africa and Australia, where ordinary motorists faced long journeys on unmade roads that called for four-wheel drive and tough suspension. In 1958 the first of the Road Rover development cars was built, combining the Land Rover's tenacity with the comfort of a Rover saloon car. Dubbed the Road Rover, it featured a Land Rover chassis and running gear clothed in a functional estate car-like body. It never made it into production. By the 1960s, Rover was becoming aware of the embryonic development of the sport utility vehicle in North America. Proto-SUVs such as the International Harvester Scout, 1961, and the Ford Bronco, 1966, began this queue of 4x4s towards speed and comfort while retaining more than adequate off-road ability for most private users. The Jeep Wagoneer proved the concept further in the direction Rover had several times attempted, but with more power. To provide Rover an edge to step up, the president of the company's USA operations shipped a Land Rover Series 288 to Britain fitted with an advanced small block all-aluminum Buick V8 engine. Rover acknowledged the emerging recreational off-road market in 1967 under Charles Spencer King, and began the 100-inch station wagon program to develop a radical competitor. Rover bought a Bronco, which featured the sort of long travel coil spring suspension necessary for the required blend of luxury car comfort and Land Rover's proven off-road ability. King is said to have been convinced of coil springs while driving a Rover P6 across rough scrubland on part of the Solihull factory site that was being redeveloped. He was also convinced that a permanent four-wheel drive transmission was needed both to provide adequate handling and reliably absorb the power required for the vehicle to be competitive. The cost of developing a totally new transmission was spread between the 100-inch SW project and one working on what would become the Land Rover 101 forward control. Powerful, light and sturdy, the Buick Alloy V8 earned off-road modifications such as carburetors that maintained fuel supply at extreme angles and provision for cranking the engine with a starting handle in emergencies. The final bodywork featured a design largely done by the engineering team, rather than David Baech's styling division. 1971 Range Rover that was used in the 3-month, 18,000-mile Trans-American Expedition, a standard production vehicle fitted with only a few specialty off-road items. Introduced to the public in June 1970, the new Range Rover was launched as a car for all reasons, boasting a top speed of around 100 miles per hour, 160 kilometers per hour, a towing capacity of 3.5 tons, spacious accommodation for 5 occupants, hydraulic disc brakes on all wheels, and a groundbreaking 4-speed, dual-range, permanent four-wheel drive system. To much critical acclaim, it appeared that Rover had succeeded in their goal of making a car equally capable both on and off-road, arguably better in both environments than any other four-wheel drive vehicle of its era. With a top speed of 95 miles per hour, 153 kilometers per hour, and acceleration from a standstill to 60 miles per hour, 97 kilometers per hour, in less than 15 seconds, performance was stated as being better than many family saloon cars of its era, and off-road performance was good, owing to its long suspension travel and high ground clearance. The 1995 classic Range Rovers would reduce the 0 to 60 miles per hour, 0 to 97 kilometers per hour, time to around 11 seconds, and increase the top speed to approximately 110 miles per hour, 180 kilometers per hour. Notable off-road feats were winning the four-wheel drive class in the first Paris-Dakar Rally in 1979 and 1981, and being two of the first vehicles, along with the Land Rover Series IA, to traverse both American continents north to south through the Darien Gap from 1971 to 1972. Like other Land Rover vehicles, most of the Range Rover's bodywork skin is constructed from lightweight aluminium, except for the two-section rear upper and lower tailgates, the rear corners adjacent to the tailgate and the bonnet on all but the earliest models. Apart from minor cosmetic changes, the body design changed very little in its first decade. However, while utility Land Rovers had body panels rolled from a single sheet of aluminium, the Range Rover used aluminium panels hung on a steel safety frame, a method pioneered with great success on the Rover P6 saloon. This allowed the bodywork of the Range Rover to carry much greater structural strength with the steel frame while retaining the corrosion-resistant and easily repaired aluminium outer panels. While the steel frame was designed by the engineering team, it was expected that Rover's stylist David Baech would provide a design for the outer panels for use on the production vehicles. For the prototypes, the engineers designed their own functional body panels simply to protect the occupants and to allow the vehicles to be driven legally on the road. However, the clean, square-cut and functional design of the prototype was deemed so good that Baech only altered the detailing, such as providing a different front grille and headlamp design. The Range Rover also marked the first appearance of Baech's trademark symmetric dashboard, where a common molding was used for the fascia superstructure on both RHD and LHD versions, onto which the pod-style instrument binnacle was simply mounted on the appropriate side. Baech would use this concept again on both the Rover SD1 and the Austin Metro in later years. The original fascia would later be nicknamed the Airfix dashboard by Range Rover enthusiasts owing to its hard, low-quality plastic switch, as the vehicle moved up market over the years, betrayed its humble beginnings as a utility vehicle. It remained with the Range Rover up until the very last years of production, when it was replaced by the soft dash, see below. Early vehicles may be distinguished by the rear C-pillars being absent of a vinyl covering, which was introduced a little later in the 1970s. One of the first significant changes came in 1981, with the introduction of a 4-door body. Until then, Range Rovers only had 2 doors, making access to the rear seats, especially in grass, rather awkward. These doors were also very large and heavy. Egress was somewhat alleviated by the special design feature of having 2 inside door opening latches in the front of the doors for the driver and front passenger, and a second set of equally large and prominently styled door opener latches on the inside rear of the doors, behind the front seats, providing rear seat occupants full autonomy to leave the vehicle. They could easily fold the seats in front of them forward, and open the door from the rear seat locations in a somewhat convenient manner. Several companies offered conversions to 4-door Range Rovers in the late 1970s. One of these companies' conversions, by Monteverdi, was even approved by Land Rover to retain warranty after it was presented at the 1980 Geneva Salon. 2 years earlier, British Leyland had restructured and promoted Land Rover into its own BL subsidiary, and the now more independent company used the Monteverdi as a basis for producing its own 4-door model in July 1981. The 4-door version was well received by the public. Its popularity was such that the 2-door was discontinued in the United Kingdom in 1984, although the 2-door continued to be produced through January 1994, mainly for the French market. The first major push-up market was in 1984, which saw the availability of leather trim, unhinged rear number plate and automatic transmission. This was followed by the 1985 model year, which saw the instrument pod replaced by a more modern one, adapted from the Austin Maestro, and new door cards, using Austin Metro door handles, with walnut inlays. The front end of the Range Rover was revamped in 1986. This brought a more pedestrian-friendly plastic grille with horizontal slats, and optional front valance with 2 fog lights. The seat base was lowered and door handles were redesigned, making it more difficult for rear passengers but greatly improving the comfort for taller people in the front. The dashboard switchgear was updated again, now featuring steering column stalks from the Austin Montego, and other miscellaneous items from the Austin Rover car range. Other changes included the windows, tailgate and bonnet, but none of those affected the general design. Bonnet and door hinges gradually evolved out of sight, and the fuel filler cap is hidden behind a hinged flap. The last major change to the interior took place in 1994, when the Range Rover was redesignated Classic upon the arrival of the replacement P38A version. The car gained a soft feel safety dashboard, derived from that used in the facelifted Series 1 Discovery, with new switches. These were lifted from the Rover 800, and instruments. These end-of-the-line models are popularly called soft dash models by the motor trade and by enthusiasts to distinguish them from other members of the Range Rover Classic series. The Range Rover broke from the Land Rovers of its time by using coil springs instead of the then common leaf springs. Because of its hefty weight, it also had disc brakes on all 4 wheels. Originally, it had no power steering, though this was added a few years after its introduction. One problem with the Range Rover chassis was that it suffered considerably from body roll. Because of this, the suspension was lowered by 20 mm, 0.8 in 1980, and later gained anti-roll bars. Air suspension was introduced in late 1992 for high-end 1993 models. Most Range Rovers had a 100-inch, 2,540 mm, wheelbase. However, 1992 saw the introduction of a more luxurious model, branded the LSE in the United Kingdom and County LWB, long wheelbase, in the United States, providing expansive rear passenger legroom absent from the 100-inch wheelbase models. These had a 108-inch, 2,743 mm, wheelbase, air suspension and 4.2-liter engines. The 100-inch Range Rover chassis became the basis for the Land Rover Discovery, introduced in 1989. The first-generation Range Rover, Early two-door model fitted with the later model alloy wheels. The post-facelift Range Rover was available with an 8-inch longer wheelbase as the LSE version, such as in this early 1990s example. Originally, the Range Rover was fitted with a detuned 135 horsepower, 101 kilowatts, version of the Buick-derived Rover V8 engine. The 3,528 cc, 3.5 liters, 215.3 cubic inches, engine was increased to a displacement of 3,947 cc, 3.9 liters, 240.9 cubic inches, for the 1989 model year, and 4,197 cc, 4.2 liters, 256.1 cubic inches, in 1992. Petrol-fueled Range Rovers were fitted with carburetors until 1986, when they were replaced by Lucas electronic fuel injection, improving both performance and fuel economy. The Lucas injection system continued to evolve over the next several of years, culminating in the 1990 to 1995 Lucas 14 clucks. Some export markets retained carburetors, with the original Zenith, Stromberg manufactured units being replaced by Skinner's Union, Sioux manufactured items. From 1979 onwards, Land Rover collaborated with Perkins on Project Iceberg, an effort to develop a diesel version of the Range Rover's 3.5-liter V8 engine. Both naturally aspirated and turbocharged versions were built, but the all-alloy engine blocks failed under the much greater pressures involved in diesel operation. The project was, therefore, abandoned. The effort to strengthen the Rover V8 for diesel operation was not, however, completely wasted. The 4.2-liter petrol variant of the engine used crankshaft castings developed in the Iceberg project. Because of the Iceberg failure, it was not until 1986 that Range Rovers gained diesel engines from the factory. The more efficient 2,393 cc, 2.4 liters, 146.0 cubic inches, inline 4VM diesel from Italy was made available as an option for the heavily taxed European market as the Turbo D model, and were increased to 2,499 cc, 2.5 liters, 152.5 cubic inches, in 1989. The VM engines were highly advanced and refined diesel engines for their time but were received poorly by the UK press due to their inconsistent torque delivery compared to the V8 models. To counter these criticisms, Land Rover used a Turbo D Range Rover to set several speed and endurance records for diesel vehicles during 1987, including a continuous run over 24 hours at over 100 miles per hour, 160 kilometers per hour. The VM were replaced by Land Rover's own 200D turbocharged diesel engine in 1992, and 300D at the end of 1994. The Range Rover used permanent four-wheel drive, rather than the switchable rear-wheel/four-wheel drive on Land Rover series vehicles, and had a lever for switching ratios on the transfer box for off-road use. Originally, the only gearbox available was a 4-speed manual unit, until ferry overdrive became an option after 1977. A 3-speed Chrysler TorqueFlite automatic gearbox became an option in October 1982, after years of demands from buyers. This was upgraded to a 4-speed ZF box in 1985, coupled to an LT230 transfer box. The other major transmission upgrade in the Range Rover's lifetime was the switch from the LT95 combined 4-speed manual gearbox and transfer box to the LT77 5-speed gearbox and separate LT230 transfer box in 1983. The LT230 was later used on both the Defender and Discovery models, but was replaced on the Range Rover by a Borg-Warner chain-driven transfer box incorporating an automatic viscous coupling limited slip differential. Earlier transmissions had a manual differential lock, operated by a vacuum servo on the LT95 and mechanically on the LT230. The LT77 had two major design changes, first an upgrade to larger bearings for the lay shaft and new ratios around 1988, then a newly designed synchro hub for third and fourth gear and double synchros for first and second. This is also known as the suffix H gearbox or LT77S. Jaguar Rover Australia began assembly of the Range Rover from CKD kits at its Enfield plant, in New South Wales, Australia in 1979. Government increases in the tariff on parts led to Australian assembly being discontinued in 1983. The Tracto Agro Group, representatives of the Land Rover brand and the Mack Truck brand in Venezuela, starting in 1973 and after making investments to prepare the Mack of Venezuela assembly plant, in the city of Las Tigueras, assembled with CKD kits, the Range Rover Classic between 1973 and 1981. Although the Range Rover was designed with the U.S. market in mind, and was planned to be launched in the USA in the middle of 1971, with a base price of $5,300, it didn't come to fruition due to the lack of finance, production capacity, and new U.S. safety and environmental regulations. While the Land Rover Series 3 was still imported into the U.S., a decline in sales and new smog regulations caused British Leyland to withdraw from the U.S. market in 1974. In the early 1980s, the Range Rover was sold in the U.S. as a gray market vehicle by 4 Los Angeles area-based dealers, and starting in 1984, also by Aston Martin's American division based in Greenwich, Connecticut. With fuel injection replacing the carburetors, the Range Rover became compliant with new U.S. emission regulations. To prepare for U.S. launch, Range Rover of North America was established in Lanham, Maryland in late 1985, with plans to import Range Rovers through the ports of Baltimore and Long Beach, California, beginning in March 1987, to be sold nationwide through a network of 36 dealers, expanding to 65 by 1988. The Range Rover was officially introduced to the U.S. market in the 1987 LA Auto Show in January and Chicago Auto Show on 7th of February. The Range Rover was officially launched in the U.S. market on March 16, 1987, and the first car was sold on the same day. In 1988, Range Rover won Playboy's Best 4x4 award. In 1989, to establish its reputation, 8 special edition Range Rovers were prepared for the Great Divide Expedition, a 12-day, 1128-mile trek in the Rocky Mountains in the state of Colorado, from 21 August to September 2, 1989. Partway through the event, one of these special edition Range Rovers was rolled multiple times at high speed by automotive journalist J. Lamb. On August 1, 1992, the Range Rover of North America shifted to Land Rover North America, Incorporated. The Land Rover Discovery 2 carried the original Range Rover platform over through 2004. Facing a limited budget, but a strong need to offer a model in between the aging 90 and 110, and the ever more successfully upmarket selling Range Rover, the first generation of a new, less expensive, more family-friendly model was derived, the Discovery. A reclothed Range Rover in essence, riding on the same chassis and wheelbase, with a body using the same windscreen, A-pillar and front door windows, it used much of the Range Rover's inner structure. However, with various cost reductions, notably a cheaper interior, a smaller, less powerful, base diesel engine, and only 2 side doors during its first year, the greatly similar vehicle was marketed at a distinctly lower price point, filling the gap in Land Rover's model range, starting in 1989. In order to give the car at least a differing silhouette from the Range Rover, the Discovery got a stepped, raised rear roof, with a Safari rear window cluster. And to be able to fit optional third-row jump seats, the rear of the car was actually made slightly longer than its more expensive brother. On top of that, the spare wheel was mounted on the outside of the vehicle. All 3 measures greatly increased the Discovery's luggage compartment space, compared to the Range, and its original 3.5-liter V8 engine was available as an option on the Disco. To compensate, the Range Rover's standard V8 engine was enlarged to 3.9 liters. In 1992, to address customers' request for more rear seat legroom in the otherwise luxurious Range Rover, a 108-inch, 2,743 mm, long wheelbase option was introduced, and in 1994, the second-generation Range Rover, LP, was introduced, using an evolution of the long wheelbase chassis and drivetrain. In 1994, the classic model, which was to continue in production alongside its replacement for a time, was also given a revised version of the more modern dashboard from the Discovery Mk1, which was significantly better quality than the original and saved manufacturing the old dash for the run-up model. While the Range Rover finally received a clean sheet redesign after 31 years, in 2001, the Discovery still kept using much of the original Range Rover's underpinnings after a successful 1998 facelift, which made it still longer and larger in the rear, and which kept it going through 2004. The Range Rover Classic was a popular platform for conversion vehicles built by independent coach builders. Some examples of common modifications include ambulances, 6x4s, convertibles, police vehicles, limos, and open-top hunting cars. Though some coach builders utilized Range Rovers simply for the chassis and drivetrain while grafting new fabricated bodies on top, most of them retained the familiar Range Rover styling elements, while upgrading the engine, transmission, suspension, or interior design. The coach builders include Car Bodies, Carmichael, FLM Panelcraft, Glenfrome, Rapport and Wood and Pickett. Two of Pope John Paul II's S3 Pope Immobiles used on his 1982 UK visit were custom Range Rovers. Ogle Design pinned the vehicles, the first fully bulletproof papal transports, and they were delivered at a cost of $128,000, equivalent to $460,000 in 2019. One of the two Range Rovers was taken back to the Vatican, and is still in use as of 2013. The other is now on display at the Cars of the Stars Museum in Las Vegas.